My name's Anthony Edwards, and I'm the Director of Music and Worship Arts here at All Souls, and I'm thrilled to have you all here this afternoon. Thank you. I want to first thank the Friends of Forum, who have sponsored our special guest's visit this afternoon, and you'll hear more about her later. But first, I want to introduce you to your moderator this afternoon, Angela Allard.
I am so glad you guys chose to spend your Saturday afternoon with us. It's going to be an interesting afternoon with these ladies. So on the stage here with me today, we have a conductor, chorus master, and educator, Judith Clurman. She's collaborated. She's collaborated with some of the world's most distinguished ensembles, composers, and institutions. She's a passionate advocate of new music and innovative programming, and she's commissioned premieres, developed ensembles, and directed work from the classical, theater, television, and film repertoires. Thank you for being here. Thank you. All right. And Ann Calvert is the president of the League of Women Voters of Kansas City and Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties. So thank you, Ann, for coming. And you All Soulers will know Sarah LaBarr. She's an educator, teacher, and actor, and currently the vice president of the National Actors Equity Association, the National Union for Actors and Stage Managers. Okay. So Anthony decided that it would be important for the choir here at All Souls to sing this piece called Washington Women. And he decided that it would be really valuable to the choir to bring Judith here to talk with the choir and work with them about why it was an important piece of music and putting history and music together. So the Friends of the Forum agreed to help sponsor this and to bring her in for this special event and to work with the choir prior to presenting this piece in October. So that's going to be October 21st. Please come back. It'll be on Sunday morning at our regular service at 10:45, and then they will repeat the performance on Sunday evening. I just said Sunday. I meant Monday, on Monday evening for the greater Kansas City community. So please, if you know anyone who is part of the Friends of the Forum, let them know that you appreciate this opportunity. And we also need to thank the Marriott next door neighbors and the League of Women Voters and KCUR and Classical KC who have been promoting this event. So, you guys, I'm going to turn it over to you, Judith, to talk first.
I'm having a great time here, and I don't want to be obnoxious, but everything is up to date in Kansas City. And I'm very disappointed you don't make a T-shirt that says that, but I got to Kansas City on a Friday, and I did. And I thank Anthony for this invitation and for the chorus for studying Washington Women. I was asked why women, and specifically why David Chase and I wrote Washington Women. And I never was asked to tell the reasons why, so why not today? Years back, I asked over a dozen American composers, well known, from theater composers Jason Robert Brown to the esteemed classicist Milton Babbitt, to write rounds on words of presidents. And I was director of choral activities at Juilliard for 19 years. And in about the middle of it, I asked these people to write, and the result was a cycle, Sing Out Mr. President. And it was first premiered at the Library of Congress, and then all of these pieces were on NPR, and I discussed a president. They interviewed me, and I discussed different presidents and played the music for a month of February, presidential month, and it was very exciting. But then after that premiere, a couple of years later, I said, wait a minute, I have to address the women. And I began thinking about what I wanted to do, but most importantly, to get a piece to educate school children. while entertaining children of all ages. Sing Out, Mr. President has been done in schools, and by the way, some of the movements at presidential inaugurations. And the thing was, what was I going to do? And choosing texts was not always easy. I wanted to find texts by women, maybe the Supreme Court justices, I don't know, maybe great women that were not divisive and in the news every day. But I was careful to find universal texts that would resonate, again, with children of all ages and would be relevant in today's world. I ended up choosing these texts of Washington women, and I worked on the project for 8 years, and I never gave up. COVID joined us in the middle of this. I fulfilled a promise to myself to have a choral piece written that honors the special women who changed or are currently changing the world. Permissions took about 3 years. Getting permission for certain texts was really hard, and as I was telling the choir this morning, I went to presidential libraries to find out about first ladies, because that's not public domain. I ended up writing directly to some people. I ended up getting to know the family of Eleanor Roosevelt. It was getting exciting, but it was also a pain because it was taking forever. The Ford Library was great. The Bush family was great. The Obamas took forever, and I could just go on and on and on. But the result was a musical setting of iconic texts taken from the speeches, opinions, interviews of 16 remarkable women from across the political spectrum. I don't say in the music Democrat or Republican. I couldn't care less. I wanted women that really meant something to me. And in a fun way and in a very important way, doing this also honored my mother, who taught me about all these women, along with some great education that I had. I grew up on Long Island in the Hicksville public schools, and we learned about a lot of these women in high school. Anyway, these women are those that spent time, a lot of time, and important time in their lives, or are currently spending time in Washington. First ladies, senators, congresswomen, Supreme Court justices, secretaries of state, our vice president, and Speaker of the House of Representatives. Perhaps we will write a new work after this election, even though our vice president is currently in the cycle. We do want to add some movements, since people could purchase music digitally. Even though the cycle is completed, we shall see. The world premiere of this piece, I'm happy to say, took place at a Tiny Desk concert on National Public Radio, and if you go to my website, you could see it. 100,000 people have seen it, and many people give opinions about it. It's interesting. The premiere was delayed for 2 years because of COVID, and the recording is online also. And it was very important for me, after the delay, to add a positive text, a combination of texts of a Vice President Kamala Harris and that of Nancy Pelosi. Each of these women in this cycle found hope in the possibilities of the American dream. And by setting their words to music with cello and piano accompaniment, we hope that everyone who listens will hear the words in fresh ways, learn about these women, and discover why they spoke these words when they did. And most importantly, I hope Washington women will inspire children of all ages to speak out as well. One of the texts that you will hear where we combined text is something that's very relevant to all of us in this room, freedom. And I wish it could be a theme song of America right now. I combine the words of Eleanor Roosevelt. Freedom makes a huge requirement of every human being. With freedom comes responsibility. With Hillary Rodham Clinton, human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all. And with that of Betty Ford, the search for human freedom can never be complete without freedom for women. I'll also say to you in Kansas City, I've done a lot of incredible projects and have conducted in music all over and taught some prominent people. This is probably the most important gift I could give to the United States. And I hope people do it forever and ever, because these women were really and are really great. Thank you.
All right, now we're going to hear from Anne. You're welcome to, you want to come up? Whatever's comfortable. Yeah.
Since I haven't figured out how to turn on that mic yet, I'll come up. All right, thank you for coming. Anthony asked if I would talk a little bit about what the League of Women Voters is doing this year for the election. And rather than give you an overview and a list of all the things that we're doing, which you can find on our website, lwvkc.org, it includes, of course, voter registration, which we're known for, and get out the vote efforts and all sorts of stuff. Instead of doing something broad like that, I want to dive into just a couple of the things that we do. One of them is that we've talked about, we've rather studied election security. And you know, if you're at a bar and you have an argument with somebody at the bar and you think, I'm never going to change that person's mind, that's true. But I regularly argue with people at the bar, not for that person that I'm talking to, but for the people, the 5 or 6 people who are sitting around us, who are listening to us, because those are the people who might be open to hear some information that they didn't have before. So I want to give you just a little bit of information that you didn't have before. I know that everybody here knows why to vote. I know you know that you can trust our elections and you can trust that your vote counts and matters. But I want to give you just a little bit of information that you can use to argue with that person at the bar for those 5 or 6 people who are listening. So first I'm going to start with election integrity. This is from the National Intelligence Council report on the 2020 election. So all of this, what's going on with our election marking devices, our machines that we use in our elections, all of that goes back to the hanging chads. Anybody remember those hanging chads from, I don't even know which election that was. I know I voted in it, but so the hanging chads, you know, were hard to read. We still don't know for sure who voted for what. I have a podcast that I do with a partner. We named our music studio part of that Hanging Chad Studios in honor of hanging chads. So after that, we decided as a country that we needed to stop using punch ballots and we needed to go to direct recording electronic voting machines. Those voting machines did not usually have a paper trail. And then in 2016, Russian hackers scanned voter registration systems for vulnerabilities, seeking to collect information on American voters. So we saw that happen, and we said, we better do some things differently. So in 2006, which of course predates the Russian infiltration, 30% of voters were using direct recording electronic machines with no paper trail. So a third of the country was. We kind of overcorrected with the hanging chads. And then in 2016, there were about 22% of voting was happening. About 22% of votes happened without a paper trail. But by 2020, it was only 9%, and in 2024, only 1.4% of the votes cast in this country were done without a paper trail. So you could tell that person at the bar, 1.4% of people in this country cast a ballot where there's no paper trail. And what happened in Georgia illustrates the importance of that paper trail. They used a paperless voting machine for several years, and just before the 2020 election replaced it with equipment that was just ballot marking devices. But those machines did have the voters make their choices electronically, and they review them on a printed ballot, which was then scanned and tabulated. So there was a paper trail. President Trump challenged the results of that election and claimed that there was widespread irregularities and fraud. And so because of that, because they could go back and they could look at those paper ballots, they could prove that there was no fraud, there were no real irregularities, and that in fact could confirm that Biden had won that state. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about how safe your ballot is and how you can maybe talk to your friends and neighbors about that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is why vote? That's a question that we hear a lot at the League of Women Voters. Why should I vote? So we've got the standard answers. You pay taxes. You should have some say in where your taxes go. We haven't always had that right. As women in particular, we haven't always had the right to vote. So we want to hang on to that right. If you're in the military or you know someone who's in the military, their lives are largely governed by, the people who make the laws and make decisions. We want to be sure that we're an active participant in that. But I also want to tell you a story about why a vote mattered here locally, and this was recent. So there was a couple who moved to Blue Springs just a few years ago, and they moved in the fall. And the first night that they were in their home, they went out to dinner because their pots are put away, they don't know where to find their dishes, so as we all do, we go out for dinner. They went out for dinner, and while they were there was a candidate running for office who came around and met all of the people who were at that restaurant. So the election was just a few weeks later, and they were responsible citizens, they voted, they had updated their registration, they had taken care of what they needed to do to vote. But they didn't have time, because they just moved, to do their research, which of course you can do easily at our national website, vote411.org, just to throw in that plug. But they didn't have time to go to Vote411 and do some research. So they agreed, this couple agreed, why don't we vote for that person we met at the restaurant? She seemed nice, she had nice things, good things to say. I think she'd be a good representative. Well, that person won by 2 votes. So that happened here. And that happened locally for them in particular. So their votes made all the difference. So that's a story. Tuck that away and tell that at the bar or the church or the restaurant or the knitting circle or wherever you go. Tell that not necessarily for the person you're talking to, but the people who are listening in. All right, thanks.
Sarah? Yep.
Hello, everyone. So Anthony Edwards asked me to talk about labor law, the importance in democracy, and the labor movements. And I do know a lot about unions, and this is actually what I ended up doing a lot of during the pandemic when the theatrical industry was basically shut down. So when I think about unions, I didn't know a lot of history about it, so I'm going to share some basic labor history with you all today and kind of get us started, and then I'm going to share a couple of women that are very important to me, and if you don't know their names, then you will learn them today. Labor history has not been easy in our country, and there is a lot. I have found that it's not taught in public schools. There are things that I learned about, such as the bonus army. That was definitely not taught about. And there's very important events. The first labor union in our country was founded by the shoemakers in Philadelphia in 1794. They were joined by printers, carpenters, and others in New York City and other major cities, especially Boston, Philadelphia. In 1842, there was a case before the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, Commonwealth versus Hunt, which was the very first time in our country that a labor union was legally able to organize. But even though unions were now legal, there were labor wars happening between 1860 through around 1910, and I do mean wars, full-on wars inside our country. You may have heard about the militant Irish miners, known as the Molly Maguires, or the fake detective agency, known as the Pinkertons, or of Mother Jones that kept working, fighting for their rights. And a notorious outburst of violence was in Chicago in 1886, and this was known as the Haymarket Affair. This was where the police opened fire on 4,000 people that were attending a peaceful rally. Sadly, 10 people were killed, 50 people were wounded. There was also the Pullman Railway strike in 1893, and this was in response to the Pullman Company cutting workers' wages by 22%. The strike was defeated when President Grover Cleveland sent in federal troops to get the trains delivering mail and other commerce back up and running. In 1869, with their focus being on arbitration rather than on strikes, the Knights of Labor were founded. And during World War I, we had the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, and they were known as the Wobblies. Also, incidentally, they have a lot of songs, a lot of labor songs, and I have one of their books, so it's also interesting for me as a singer. The AFL, the American Federation of Labor, was founded in 1866. The CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, emerged from internal fighting when John Lewis, president of the United Mine Workers, punched Big Bill Hutchison, president of the Carpenters Union, at the AFL convention in 1935. Yeah, I think the theme that I learned from this is that these were all men. It wasn't until 1955 that the two reunited to form the AFL-CIO that we know today. But back to 1935, which was an important year for another reason. The National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, also known as the Wagner Act, was passed by Congress. Another important side note, these laws are only as effective as they are upheld by the courts. So it wasn't until 1937 that the Supreme Court upheld the National Labor Relations Act. The NLRA enshrined into federal law the right of private sector employees to form unions, collectively bargain, and go on strike. Many credit the NLRA to FDR as part of his New Deal. But the New Deal was actually being driven by, and this is our first, my favorite person in the world, my husband will attest to this, is Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins was FDR's labor secretary. And not only was Frances Perkins the first female cabinet member, but she served in this capacity for 12 years. She had witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911 in New York City, where 146 garment workers were killed, most being young immigrant women. And so she was a social worker. She came from that side. This tragic event was the catalyst that inspired Frances Perkins' career of social and political work. And for our last tidbit of labor history, 1947, despite a veto by President Harry Truman, our local guy, the Taft-Hartley Act was passed, which amended the NLR to restrict many union activities and allowed states to pass anti-union laws, which we know is right to work for less. You may remember the 2018 campaign, Proposition A, where we defeated that measure in Missouri. The second woman I want to talk to you about is Liz Shuler. She is the first female president of the AFL-CIO, and I was proud in 2022 that I was at the AFL-CIO National Convention in Philadelphia, and I voted for the very, very first female president. It was an historic moment, and she is leading the charge. I was able to hear her recently speak on a couple of occasions, and one thing that stood out to me, and this is important, how unions impact our democracy. Union workers make up 1 in 5 voters in swing states. And also right now in our country, we have 76% approval rate of unions. But I believe, if my numbers may be not completely current, but I believe in the private sector, we're about 9 to 10% of the employment. So we're a very, very small portion of it, but we have the opportunity to make a difference in this upcoming election. Ways that unions can help make change where our laws and our elected officials don't do that work. I can speak personally in our CBAs, which stands for collective bargaining agreements. We are putting language in those agreements where members have access to health care, which includes access to abortion. So if they happen to live in a state where that is not allowed, they have access and transportation with no questions asked, and ability to get to a doctor. Especially in my industry, we have national tours, so people, our industry, we're very transient, so we're moving across the country, and we have to have access to health care. So if the laws and the government is not doing it, the unions are going to find a way to do it, to put it into our agreements with our employers. An important piece of legislation for unions right now is called the PRO Act. It will not get passed in this Congress. So our push right now is for pro workers. Whatever your party is, are you for the worker? If you are not signing a paycheck, then you are a worker. And that is an important thing that I like to remind people, that is a bipartisan thing. And the last thing I want to mention today is that there is a fantastic new Broadway musical called Suffs. And I learned in watching this show that it took women 65 years to get the right to vote. I did not realize that it was that long. So it was wonderful to see that musical in New York City. They have a GOTV effort right there in the lobby. And the finale for this number is called Keep Marching. One of the producers is also Hillary Clinton. It's an incredible music. It's the story about the suffragettes and their work and what they went through. Union work is not perfect. The NLRA specifically excluded domestic workers who were typically Black, low income, and in the South. Also excluded farm workers, which were also typically Black and brown people. So there are people, it was not a perfect piece of legislation, and it was fought, but it is the best we have, and our job right now is to push to get us back to that 1935 imperfect law. So that is where we are. Thank you.
All right. Well, I hope you learned a little bit there. Yeah, we got a history lesson and an election lesson. Now we need some music lesson. Okay. All right. Typically with the forum, we take up a collection. You are in a church, so we're going to pass the hat. But while that's happening, please start thinking about some questions. We're going to have the mic open, and we're going to welcome you all to come up and pose some questions for our panelists. But, and Anthony, you got that under yep, okay. If anyone wants to jump in and help him do that, it'll go a little bit quicker. There we go. All right. I'm going to ask you guys. I think they'll turn on your mics when we're ready here. Just kind of a softball question for you. If you want to tell me who you'd like to spend, what Washington woman would you like to spend a Saturday afternoon with having a conversation?
Well, I've already answered. It's Frances Perkins. I'm quite smitten with her work. I will add that she was the only female cabinet member for FDR, but it was not his idea. She was actually the cabinet member for New York State under Governor Al Smith at that point in time. So FDR actually stole his idea because women had just gotten the right to vote. So they were like, oh, let's put a woman on the cabinet. But she was the person behind the Fair Labor Standards Act, the child labor laws, all of the fire safety. Frances Perkins, she did it all. Yes, thank you, FDR, but she was the person behind it. And she dressed dowdy on purpose. So men would talk to her and tell her their secrets, and then she used them against them. So I loved her.
Excellent.
Frances Perkins also, from what I remember studying her in high school, actually, that her name is behind legislation for Social Security.
Yes.
Yes, and she kept her maiden name Perkins. She didn't take her husband's name, which was amazing way back when. Well, I can't choose one. Maybe Madeleine Albright. That's my first from all of these, and then Shirley Chisholm.
And I'm going to answer somebody you probably don't know who used to be the president of the board, the National Board of Directors of the League of Women Voters. Her name was Dr. Deborah Turner, and she's worth looking up. But I think that we should all we should plan this dinner party with all of them. I want Dr. Deborah, to interact with Frances Perkins, because I want to be at that party too. So maybe afterwards, let's plan the menu. Let's talk about how we're going to do that.
All right. Well, feel free to line up at the microphone if you have any questions. But I'll just pose another one for anyone that would like to take a stab at this. How are women influencing democracy today?
Well, we've got a lot of women who are fired up, and young women who are fired up and talking about politics in a way that they haven't before. We've got some celebrities who have made some endorsements that have gotten a lot of attention, and so that's sort of surface how we're changing politics. Probably people who know a little bit more about the inner workings of Washington have deeper answers than that, but there's definitely more conversation out there.
Look who the candidate is. I mean, everybody's scared to mention that, but I know from the change in some of my 18-year-old voice students at the Manhattan School of Music. I am not allowed to speak politics with them, but they came in after the debates and they sat down and they started posing questions to me about what if, what if, what if, what if. And I have encouraged them to read more literature, the National League of Women Voters, I mean, to some of them. They never spoke this way before, so I think that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
I notice a lot in my friend circle that, well, I'll just say it, they hate the patriarchy, and that the institution and the oppression that comes from our government systems, and they're looking for ways to break that. The reproductive rights issue that's on the ballot in many, many states is also driving women voters, and their husbands, their boyfriends, their fathers, their everybody. I think we're going to be driving a lot of the votes in a lot of places because of issues that are most important to us.
All right, thank you.
I have two questions. One pretty specific. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I have two questions. One pretty specific. The Georgia Board of Election has voted for a hand count, which I think everybody, both sides of the, both bipartisan election people have said that's a terrible idea. Is it going to get challenged, and will it likely be overturned? And if not, what would be the consequences? And the other question is, more broadly, do you guys, and I think this is impossible, but is there a way to get past the division, the horrible division in this country, and our inability to have civic conversations?
I'm willing to take on the second one. The first one, I wouldn't presume to predict. I'm not versed well enough in legal matters, and I predict there'll be some lawsuits, but I don't know the specifics of that. At the League of Women Voters, we believe that we walk straight down the middle. A lot of times we do take some positions on issues after careful study, but one of the reasons that we are nonpartisan is because we think that people will actually hear what we have to say, hear the information that we give, if we just state the facts. And I actually saw a speaker last week who wrote a book called How to Raise a Citizen, and she was talking about bringing the temperature down and changing the way that we speak so that we don't participate in the kind of rancor that we hear around us. And it's so easy to go straight to, those people are jerks, or I can't believe that idiot said that. And I've been practicing since I saw her speak, bringing the temperature of my own speech down. And so I think it starts there with us, and I'm going to go back to that person in the bar that you're arguing with about whatever. So, yeah, so that's, yeah.
I'll say that I think many of you are going to feel this, all the television shows, but I'm voting for our vice president. I feel passionately and about her work and the future of this country, but I also turn on other TV stations because when someone starts screaming at me, I want to have an intelligent conversation with them and be able to quote what I heard on Fox News.
I think some of our division can actually be solved by the arts, by what we do. We bring people together. I've done a lot of arts advocacy work in Washington, D.C., and I have to go to Republican offices and Democratic offices. And, I do change my rhetoric depending on which office I'm in, for sure. But the arts bring in 4.7% of the GDP. We bring in money. On average, when you go to an arts event, you're going to spend about $38. It's on parking, that's on babysitting, that's on dinner, that's on drinks, and that's on top of the ticket price. And we are in a capitalist society. So what can bring the elected officials together is working on money, budget concerns, getting our economy growing. And if we supported the National Endowment for the Arts, and the arts also teach empathy, which is a great solution for divisive topics. And if there was more theater, more music, more art, we would have less division.
I want to personalize something for 1 second about this and the arts, and I told the chorus this story this morning. I was consulted about music for President Obama's inauguration, and then I was consulted about music for President Trump's inauguration. My first reaction was, I don't want to have anything to do with that inauguration, but then I calmed down, and I said, I'm an American citizen. This is a presidential inauguration, and I'm going to be very bipartisan. And they came to my home, and we sat down and had a civilized conversation about it.
Well, thank you a lot for this very interesting panel discussion. And I just want to comment briefly, because I know comments aren't allowed, but when my sister's grandsons, who just turned 18, asked why vote, I referred them to the Project 2025, which they hadn't read, and I thought that was helpful. They found it helpful. But my question is, how can we get more personally involved? I will tell you what I did, and not for praise, just because I felt like it was really important. And I know that election workers are very much needed and also kind of under attack in some ways. So I became an election judge, and I've observed firsthand and personally how it works, how the sausage is made. What else can we do?
I mean, I think like what you're doing is a step in the right direction. There's an organization called powerthepolls.org, signing up for that, because they always are looking for people to do that. And just making sure people are registered to vote, vote.org. These are the two organizations that Actors Equity Association is partnering with this upcoming election. So finding that issue for each person, for them to be engaged on. My union is very, very progressive. It would make regular all-solars almost look red. They're super, super progressive. And there are some people that do not want to vote for the top ticket. And so there are other ways that you can talk to people if you don't want to vote like vote down ballot or only vote up ballot. The point is, find that issue, find the thing that you care about, and vote.
All right. How many election judges do we have in the room, or former election? All right. Okay, we need some more. We've been recruiting election judges. You want to talk about that just briefly in addition to your question, Diane?
Actually, I don't have a question. Just about election judges. Obviously, all of the counties need them, so it's November 5th. It's November 5th. I would encourage everyone to go to it's like jacksoncountyvote.org. It'll be in next Friday's Flickr, hopefully. Jackson, Johnson County, whatever. It is kind of a long day. You do make a couple bucks, but it is very well worth it. I would highly encourage everybody to do that. I just have a quick comment. I'm also a Frances Perkins fan, and there is a small movement to make her birthday a national holiday, which is April 10th. So if you're looking for a new cause, you can pick up Frances Perkins' birthday national holiday.
And I'll add that there's also a move to have a national movement at her grandfather's homestead place. It's in Maine, and so they're trying to get a national monument there for her as well. I subscribe to her newsletter.
I think it's a good excuse for a party at All Souls. You can host it for us? Yeah, all right.
First of all, singing Judith's song cycle, Washington Women, is absolutely thrilling, and I encourage everyone to come hear it performed in October. I have thought often while singing it that many of these words, in some form or another, we heard from everybody from the founding fathers to current politicians. But why is it important to hear these words coming from women's mouths?
Do you mean women's chorus, women singing? No.
I mean the words you chose to put in the songs.
Well, I get it. Quickly for people who don't know the cycle, it's Condoleezza Rice, Elena Kagan, Eleanor Roosevelt, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Betty Ford, Margaret Chase Smith, Senator and Congresswoman, Shirley Chisholm, Laura Bush, Sandra Day O'Connor, Abigail Adams, Madeleine Albright, Barbara Bush, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Michelle Obama. Why is it important? Gut reaction, they're the best. They could teach universal rights. They resonate over and over in our lives. They're passionate. They are national. Many of them national stars, and people are into star power. And I think they're great. I can't say much more than that, but I want to say that singing them and setting them to music was hard because they are words that were speeches and they're not poetry, but in a funny way they are poetic. And they just resonate over and over again. By the way, the piece was written for soprano, alto, and tenor bass, a mixed chorus, and for cello and piano, so it wouldn't be that expensive for people to perform it, and not with orchestra. But more than that, the mixed chorus, because I believe in the universality of people. I believe that anybody should be able to sing it. But there is a movement now out in the country with interest that women's choruses want to sing it and men's choruses want to sing it. So I'm pleased, but I'm not sure how much I believe in that. I'm the creator, one of the creators. That I love making it an inclusivity thing for all Americans to sing. Am I answering your question?
I guess I'm wondering if a woman's voice is different in any way. Is there a particular perspective from a woman that you don't get when listening to a man do these words?
I honestly don't think that way at all. When they're great words, they're great words, whether they be, because I did sing out Mr. President, right? And I remember standing at President Obama's inauguration in Washington saying, oh, say great words, say great words. I have to write, I need a final piece for that cycle, right? And yes, we can, right? You know, that, and we put that in. There was no difference for me. I'm sorry. You know, it's like if there's a great singer, and I need a great singer for something, if it fits and it's right, if it's a woman's voice, okay. If it's a male voice, you know, a men's voice, it's okay. But if it's right for the occasion, and these were the right women for this occasion, for the piece. And we could talk about it over dinner sometime.
I would like to add to that, though. I do think it's important for us to hear these words of women, because women have not always had equal opportunity to speak in the public forum, in the public realm. And it is very important for young women to hear these voices and to feel empowered to speak themselves. So a piece like this sets an example for the young women who hear it. And so I think that's why it's important that these are the voices of women.
And I must say also that I've heard it performed in schools. You know, I performed the New York premiere. I went up to the Bronx and I taught it to a high school. And I brought my professional singers and we all joined in, and TV thought this was real cool, so we got coverage, and they made a big deal because it was women's voices. And their favorite piece, and wait a minute, we also had a performance. I asked that the whole high school get closed for this performance, and we brought 600 or 700 kids to listen to it. And they all fell in love with Abigail Adams because she was the first women's libber. So I got through to some kids, and I thought that was terrific, but that's who I am.
Had a question about Abigail. Her influence on the presidency was a little indirect. And how, could you compare it to Laura Bush's influence?
Well, woo. I was not behind the scenes with Laura Bush's presidency, but you know, she was into reading, if I remember correctly. And Abigail Adams, I mean, I've read books, John Adams biographies, and the love letters between them, and she spoke out. And I don't know enough about Laura Bush to answer that question. However, what I've told everybody, what's the exact date when she said, remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power in the hands of the husbands. I pointed out to the chorus this morning that she wrote that letter to John from Massachusetts, dated March 31st, 1776. 1776, July 1776. It could take 3 months for a letter to be delivered from Massachusetts to Philadelphia, or even 2 months. This is pretty heavy. She wrote these words in 1776. I think that beats Laura Bush. I'm sorry.
There you go. Right.
Don't ask me these things.
Now, I was a little remiss in our introduction this morning. You know, this forum has been dedicated to one of our former members, Mary Lindsay, and Anne, you had something that you wanted to tell us about Mary's work.
I did. Mary was a member of the League of Women Voters, and so I'm happy that we are dedicating this in the concert in October to Mary. She worked tirelessly. I only had the pleasure of knowing her for a few years, but I miss her terribly. And she would have been, well, she was a huge champion of your piece of music. She was a huge fan, and she actually brought it to the League of Women Voters so that we could partner in this concert. And so I think it's worth mentioning her, talking about her just a little bit,
and the work that she did, which was tremendous.
She was amazing, yes. All right. What do you think about this upcoming inauguration? Are you going to participate?
Well, if somebody gives me a ticket, I'm going to go. I think it's our duty to watch it. No matter the results, we have a duty to watch it. It's part of history, and we're a part of it. And we have to see for our own eyes what is going on, because otherwise it's going to be on social media, it'll be twisted, it'll be turned into different things. And so we need to be a witness to it. We need to observe, and if there are things that we still need to correct and fight for, which the work is ongoing. Like I said earlier at the end of Suffs, the musical, keep marching. It does not stop, no matter the results of the election.
Well, if my candidate wins, I'm going to go stand outside, just like I did for Barack Obama, from 5:30 in the morning. But I'll watch the inauguration otherwise. It's actually, you're kind of crazy to go, because it's freezing. You know, it's easier to watch it on TV. And I've watched every inauguration. You're so right. You have to.
Mm-hmm. I'll look for you there in the crowd, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, you guys, we welcome any more questions if you have them. Joe?
All right, so I'll be the first man here. So I'd like, if you could get personal for a moment, I just, when you just think about things that we might not understand, like what are some, like a low point or hardest point in the issues we're talking about here, about women and the voice of women. When was darkest or hardest for you, and then and where do you feel about, what do you feel about looking at that moment now where we are now?
Go ahead.
That's a really good question. That's a deep question. That's an hour's discussion question. The question was on a personal level. Let me see if I get it right. On a personal level, how has the struggle for, with regard to the issues that are addressed this year, that are coming up this year, how on a personal level has that affected us, and what do we find most difficult about it? And it's something I've actually thought about a lot lately. For me personally, I was raised by a feminist mom. When we go around the table at League of Women Voters functions and ask, how long have you been in the League? I tell people I was born into it. It's not a cult, I promise. But I also, my mom, I remember distinctly when my mom got her first credit card in 1972, I believe it was, the first credit card in her name. So she was a feminist, but lived in a world where she had three choices for career: teacher, nurse, or secretary. And she was much smarter and much more ambitious and much more talented than that. I mean, not to denigrate those professions at all, but she would not have probably chosen one of those professions. And then when I came of age, it felt like things were, the message I heard was that you can do anything you want, you can be anything you want, but that wasn't true. And we weren't finished with the struggle, and there was a lot more work to do, and I didn't realize it. And so for me, the most difficult issue personally has been, where do I fit in this world that we've created? What is the balance between for example, with my husband, where is the balance between what I expect as a partner and what is part of being kind and amicable, and what is me behaving because I've been programmed to acquiesce as a woman. And so how do we find our place? And to bring it back to the women of Washington, I think one of the ways we figure out where our place is that we make things more equal for all of us, and for all of us by law, and that we find our place in our government and we make things better.
She gave she gave a great answer. I think this piece happened because of my own struggle, being a musician and a woman, and being turned down, and always being, many jobs went to 2 candidates, and told to my face, some major jobs in music, no, you're a woman, we're not giving this to you. And I will also bring up that choral music is not looked upon as is really looked upon as more of Christian, and I'm Jewish, and I was told to my face 3 times, no, you're a woman and you're Jewish, so forget it, right? But I never let it get me down. Maybe it got me down for a day, and I just persevered. And I will say publicly, it's because I remember my grandmother, who was a Russian immigrant, who came over, and I remember, I love my grandmother, and we talked all the time, and I'm in my backyard on Long Island with her one day, and she started talking about the day women got the vote in America, and how magical that was, and that I had a vote my whole life. No matter what would happen, I had a vote. She told me I had to only vote for one party at that point too, and I listened, and I have been very good. And then I had my mother she was a rock with me when I just didn't get work over and over, but we just heard it. There have to be some rules and regulations about this. And I now became a grandmother, and I look at my granddaughter, and I go, oh no, it can't be that hard for her. It has to change. I personally am tired of hearing about the abortion issue, about women's rights. It just shouldn't even be issues anymore. I can't take it. And I am stressed out. And it's wonderful, again, to be conducting music and getting a little calmer about this.
And I would say for me, I joined Actors Equity Association in 2008, and I worked just as much as a union member as I did before I had joined the union. But what I quickly learned is that most of the union contracts were given to white men. And yes, there tends to be more women, more female-identifying people at an audition, but that wasn't equitable, it wasn't fair to me, and it bothered me greatly. Recently, our union did something that just has basically upended our process, and we did something called open access. We used to have an apprenticeship program where if you worked 50 weeks, then you were eligible to join the union. Then they lowered it to 25, but then with open access, they completely opened it up. If you had any professional credit, you could join the union. And so what that did, it's a pretty amazing thing. So specifically, that not only helped women, but especially brown and black people have access to union jobs and safety, protections, pension, healthcare, et cetera, all of these things. So it is not just the white men, and we also ask for demographic reports from all of our theaters and from our partners, and we want to see who is getting those contracts. So it's taken a while, but we're making a change, and so that is something that I'm going to share that's hopeful. And but for me personally, it was the day that Roe v. Wade was overturned. It's a tie between the day that Trump was elected and Roe v. Wade was overturned. Those 2 days were very, very personally hard. But, you know, nothing, it takes me a day, and I wallow for a little bit, and then I get to work. Mm-hmm. So that's what we have to do.
Oh, man. This song cycle is going to be performed on October the 21st here at All Souls, and we're going to have one more question. Come on up, and then I'll finish out here.
All right. Oh, wow, this is so close to you guys. It feels weird. Thank you. Thanks for pointing out the allies that women might join with in doing the work. and the energy that might come from looking at history and other women who have done the work. As I'm listening to your answers, I'm thinking about all the people who serve in positions like judges in the election and things like that, who are doing the work because it's their job, and they're called bureaucrats. And as I'm working on my graduate degree in public administration, I'm reminded of how people who do this for a living because it's what's right and it's what their job is, are so important to the backbone to then allow people who have voices that want more rights and things like that to do that work. So I would love for any of you to point out like some sort of governmental entity that has been helpful for you in a fashion doing your work.
Well, there is a federal agency, the FMCS, Federal Mediator Conciliatory Services, and they're mediators. And they are neutrals that come in, they're provided for the government for free, and they help in negotiations with an employer and a union. And every time there's a negotiation in our country, every single one, they get notified. And if there is a dispute, we can ask for a list of mediators that can come in and help us and come get a solution. So that's something from the government that I think is very helpful because when unions and the employers work together, that creates good commerce. And so that keeps things running. And we don't have to come to an agreement, we just have to meet at the table in good faith and try. And so that is something that I appreciate from the government. That would be my agency, the FMCS.
Shout out to the Kansas City Board of Elections. They really want everybody who's eligible to have the opportunity to vote.
Mm-hmm. Well, in reading the lyrics to your song cycle, it's just inspiring. And it's heavy on human rights and citizenship rights and obligations and responsibilities. And as an immigration attorney, I'm going to encourage my new citizens to come and hear your piece and share it in my office if I can. But you guys, you've heard some really amazing women here talk about union rights and women's rights and voter rights and human rights. And I just thank you all for your work and for you all for being here today. And please get involved with us. If you want to be an election judge, we have kind of a team here. If you want to work on women's rights, come join me. We have the Claudine team here that's going out to lobby or canvas and do postcards and everything else. We need you to raise your voices. So please, thank you for coming today.
By the way, could I add one thing? The words of Barbara Bush in the cycle, it was part of a commencement address she gave at Wellesley College in 1990. Believe in something larger than yourself. Get involved in some of the big ideas of our time.
Ooh, amen. Thank you. All right. So enjoy your day.